So it's been, what, about a week or something since the new Umbral Monument dropped, and yesterday I actually decided to go ahead and do my Umbral Monument runs. And just for clarification, this is the team that I used on the latest one, right? It's a pretty built Fangi team with Antil still sitting at level 80 and a partially artificed Fangi. Nobody's maxed out in this team, but she is partially artificed, but level 90, so, you know, pretty built units to do this. I just wanted to add that in specifically because of some of the comments I might make about that. I want that context about the latest Umbral Monument, should I say. I want that context to be there in regards to what I'm saying. But going ahead and just jumping over to the Umbral Monument, I kind of wanted to talk about where Umbral Monument's at now, my thoughts on where it's at, what we've seen about the new Umbral Monument in comparison to the last one and the older ones, and specifically what the Umbral Monument and also the survival event that we recently had could potentially be used for other modes as well. So let's get straight into talking about the latest one, Turbidity Manifest. I love the quantity in this, but I must admit, I think in terms of mechanics, I think it was a little bit lesser than prior, and that's specifically because I do really think Howling Flame was a great fight, right? You know, the rage and then the stacks and then having to consume those, otherwise you get hit with the combustion and, you know, you're paying the price then, right? And also, this was an interesting one. This was a lot easier, but I like the idea that we had traps to break, otherwise, you know, we'd get a character wipe. This is cool. And the reason I'm specifically speaking about these things as well, because these are the things that I find interesting and potentially could be applied to other stuff as well. Then we had this one, which I think was less of a good design. But also, I still like the fact that, you know, we had to interrupt these guys, otherwise it was a bitch. But this one was a little bit more frustrating than difficult, if I'm honest. That one took me a couple of times to complete. The Sea of Loathing was the first time, and Howling Flame took me about 4 or 5 times. But I really enjoyed those, specifically the Howling Flame. On the new one, I did every one first time, apart from Tidal Grief, which took me 2 times. Now, that's why I brought up my team earlier on, right? I do have a pre-built Fangi team, so that's the context there. Okay, you might not be running that team, so of course, particular certain stages, especially stages like Mud Flow and Blood Debased, are going to be affected by your units. They're not specifically tailored towards any one unit in general, although of course with things like Tidal Grief, anything with sort of AoE is great, right? Because, you know, they don't attack, they just push to the middle and then explode, and then you're in trouble. But I enjoyed them all. They were actually good, right? I think Umbral Monument is genuinely in a positive state at the moment. I like the fact that we're not just pretty much having the same fights over and over with a little bit of a different resistance and a different enemy, but it's pretty much the same thing, right? We're doing the same thing all the time. You know, there's a big difference from fighting Howling Flame and Sea of Loathing than there was to fighting the Blood Debased and the Tidal Grief as well. These are totally different fights, and I like that variety in how they're trying things out. There's experimentation going on here, right, which is brilliant. And I also think this experimentation is a potential real positive for other modes as well. And the reason I mentioned the survival mode a little bit earlier on, because that had a lot of mechanics and little interesting stages that on their own were kind of throwaway stages that weren't amazing, right? But the ideas and the potential of some of those mechanics being applied with other mechanics, like certain mechanics within Umbral Monument, in my opinion, have real potential for other modes in the future, specifically things like CC, when we're thinking about modifiers and difficulty scaling in a stage like that, where you're having to deal with multiple different things going on at the same time, and that's where the difficulty really starts to compound. Imagine you're having to deal with like the slugs that are exploding and maybe trying to group those up on and around enemies to help deal with those enemies as well, to clear out particular things or stun enemies through the use of those enemies. Having to deal with an enemy like your bro in Howling Flame, where bro's stacking up abilities, and then if you don't get those stacks off, he's about to really inflict you with a massive debuff or a potential damage over time. And then while all that's going on, you're having to deal with something like the Hypergryph as they're pushing towards a particular area where they're going to explode, right? And then maybe even something like those dudes who are popping the traps here and there. Sounds like a lot going on, right? But when you think about something like CC, that's when I start to think that, okay, maybe they could potentially start to use those along with different modifiers that are applied to you in terms of potential health debuffs and straight up enemy buffs in terms of damage, crit, health, defense, all of those sort of things, right? Which I'm sure we'll probably see. It starts to bring in a bunch of factors that when you start to think about it sound insanely difficult and probably super frustrating for most people. But contingency contract is kind of like that, right? You know, if you want to go for those high scores, prepare to lock in, really. And if you're not built in terms of your units, and if you're not built for it as well, you're going to struggle. Because at the moment, Umbral Monument is still one of those things where people are able to do it solo. You're able to go in with unbuilt teams as well, or just go in with your favorite team, which is great, right? It allows you to kind of tackle it in any way and experience overcoming some more difficult mechanics, but not like the truly hardcore difficulty mechanics or something like that we hope contingency contract brings in this game. And we don't hope it's just a stat stick purely, but actually a thinking thing. And that's why I say these sort of mechanics could be interesting, and the sort of mechanics that we saw in the survival, as I say, where maybe you've got something like those slugs that are potentially you can make them explode and also deal damage to yourself and enemies. You can try and herd those around other particular enemies, and then if you have something like the tidal grief stage with the actual mud flows pushing towards an enemy to explode, if then you could use the exploding slugs against those sort of things. And you know, it would require you to herd enemies, to get lines of sight, to really potentially think about your team usage for particular stages as well, in terms of if we ever do start to see more trap master characters, because at the moment the only real character that we've got that you could argue is sort of like a pseudo summon sort of trap master character is Aviwenna, which hopefully we start to see more characters like that. We could really start to see some interesting mechanics and differing ways to potentially clear these stages then, because if you've got all these different moving parts going on, there's a lot of more potential then to clear it in a different way, because that's one of the beauties of Arknights, which you're always going to be limited to a degree when you're playing an actual 3D action game, is the variety in how to tackle stages. You're going to be limited in a game like this, but if we can try and broaden it somewhat, it's never going to compete with Arknights, but broaden it in comparison to the typical experience in this space, I think it would really be a good thing, right? And I do like that we're seeing different things. Each stage genuinely feels like a different approach from the developers, in my opinion. Like last time, it felt a lot more around actual character mechanics, so to speak, that you had to pretty much, it was break a trap, interrupt a character, remove a stack, so to speak, where with this it was more about, okay, with something like this it was pretty much just like kill the one dude as fast as possible. Obviously the lower health he gets, the more he duplicates, and the tidal grief one, these felt a little bit more, there were character mechanics, right, but they felt a bit more like stage mechanics potentially, if that makes sense, or sort of in between. Obviously with these guys, definitely a stage mechanic, because they had to get to a particular point in the stage, so your positioning and where you engage them, massive. And then you think about that in a larger stage with a bunch of other stuff going on, where you can potentially herd and train characters in to try and, you know, get those group activities, those CC attacks. That's where like you really start to see the stage mechanic come in then as well. And I really think these do feel like test beds for other stuff. They're fine on their own as well, right? These are not bad stages, I just want to say that. But I do genuinely think they do feel like tests for other stuff. And I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see a lot of Umbral Monument enemies throughout all of the Umbral Monuments actually start to come into something like CC. Because when Umbral Monument first dropped, I was a little bit skeptical about it. I was like, okay, it looks like we're getting a Tower of Adversity just with a bigger time frame, right? And potentially a little bit more of a emphasis on character mechanics. But I must admit, I've been pleasantly surprised where we go. Don't get me wrong, I am not like saying Umbral Monument's the best thing since sliced bread. It's not changing the gacha space. But in comparison to something like Terror of Adversity, which for me, it's not great, right? And I'm not crapping on Wuri, I'm specifically just targeting Terror of Adversity. It could be so much better, and I like that we've gone down this route with variety of enemies, variety of stages, and varieties of mechanics and what we're supposed to be doing. Every stage feels inherently different to other stages, and that's brilliant. That is actually genuinely really appreciated by me, and I'm a big fan of that, and hopefully that continues and every Umbral Monument feels different to the previous Umbral Monument as well. I definitely would potentially like to see, I don't know, maybe it's something they're waiting for CC, right, bro? I genuinely would like to see maybe an extra like EX Umbral Monument stage where maybe having to deal with 2 stages enemies at the same time, so it's almost like you know, it's not CC, but like, you know, it's that sort of bridge between Umbral Monument and that where, I don't know, maybe you have to fight 2 units from 2 different Umbral Monuments together on a stage or something like that. I think that would be really cool personally, and it might even be something that I massively struggle with myself, and I'm okay with having content in a game that I'm not capable of clearing. I'm perfectly fine with it. I'm genuinely okay with that. It gives you something to continue to strive towards as well, that maybe you can't clear it now, but at some point you will when you actually just get better at the game, or maybe a unit comes along that just makes it a little bit easier for you personally. But yeah, I'm happy that it doesn't feel like it caters to any one character. Of course, at the moment, Fangi's is really strong as well, so she did make quite light work of these. But, you know, I'm sure you could batter through this with a physical team, and I'm actually going to try that out as well. I am going to try out some solo runs as well, because I think that'll be interesting. Probably, I'm not that guy, so I doubt, I don't know what'll be happening with the solo runs, but I'm sure physical will do a fine job on these as well. But, yeah, I just kind of wanted to talk about Umbral Monument, where it's at, and how I think it can be implemented into other parts of the game. And I think at the moment we're seeing from what looks like experimentation, testbed experimentation to me on some of these modes, especially in survival as well, and Umbral Monument, that we're going to start to see some of these maybe pop up in other parts of the game. You know, attached and integrated with other mechanics going on as well that could be really, really cool. But as Umbral Monument, sorry, goes in itself, I think it's fine. I am pleasantly surprised by how much I've been enjoying Umbral Monument. I thought I was gonna hate it, if I'm honest, but I've become actually a fan. When it comes round, I'm looking forward to doing it. Just this time, I've just been busy, so I haven't been able to really get on Endfield as much as I would like. I haven't been able to game as much as I would have liked, so I was a little bit late doing it. But I had a lot of fun. It was a really good time. Not as difficult as I would have hoped. That's fine. That's fine. Again, I did tackle it with a Fangi team. I take that into context, and I'm gonna try it with other teams as well. And I might come back and go, holy shit, I got cooked. Who knows, right? But yeah, I think Umbral Monument's in a good state at the moment. I think it's a good launch to potentially take mechanics and apply them to other modes that are going to be far more interesting. And I can't wait, if I'm honest. But guys, I'd love to know what you think down below about where Umbral Monument's at the moment, about the latest one in comparison to the other ones. What do you think about the variety of the stages as well? And what do you think about where I'm looking at as well, that it definitely does look like there's experimentation for future content where we could potentially start to see this stuff come together in other modes also that could be potentially incredibly difficult as well, if they have the balls to do that. Arknights was never afraid to have genuinely difficult content, and sometimes early on in the experience as well, but genuine difficult content for players to potentially get filtered by. Right, I am curious to see if Hypergryph are willing to do that. There's lots of other filters in the game, so maybe. But anyway, guys, yeah, let me know what you think down below. If you've enjoyed the video, give it a like, subscribe if you're new. I'll see you all in the next one. Ta-ra.